usually have kind of a mental checklist of what needs to happen for the trip to be a good trip. And so for the trip to Ireland, I asked myself, what can I do to make sure that this is a really good trip? And one of the things on my list was eat fish and chips every single day. And that's what I did. Every single day, and one day, twice. Call me Ishmael, for I have caught a fish, and it was a good one. And then I got back home and somebody mentioned mercury poisoning. So there's that. Well, maybe one of the best meals I had was, not counting the fish and chips, was breakfast. They're serious about breakfast. They have something they call full breakfast. Had I been eating half breakfast all these years, I would like the full breakfast. Steve Marin, the pastor from Hodge Church, who went with me, he said, yes, we want the full breakfast. Bring us the full breakfast. And so they did. And it had everything you might think. It had eggs and sausage and something they called bacon, but it looked more like ham. And then it had unusual stuff, hence the fullness therein. It had mushrooms and tomatoes and beans that weren't really that good. And then it had stuff that I didn't want to know what it was, and they called it pudding. And it came in two colors, black and white. And I haven't Googled it, and I wish you wouldn't either. But I ate it. I ate it all. Part of the joy of living is eating. It's not just a function. It doesn't just, we don't just eat in order to live. There's a pleasure in eating. Part of what makes it great to be alive is the way we receive nourishment by eating. Think back to all the best meals you've ever had. Maybe they would include meals in elementary school. Pizza day was always a favorite. Students gathering with excitement at the lunchroom door, looking through the little narrow slit as the lunch ladies cook up these gigantic sheets of pizza that they cut into rectangles that fit just perfectly on those segmented trays. Or maybe you weren't into pizza day. Maybe you liked chicken patty day. I always did. I have seen people who would become lawyers and doctors and senators push and shove to get at the front of the line for chicken patty day. Or maybe a favorite meal of yours was one cooked for you by your children. Breakfast in bed. You didn't really want to think about all the mess that might be downstairs. Nothing smells like it's on fire. You simply accept the gift as it's offered. Or maybe a favorite meal of yours was one that you caught by yourself. A salmon that was so strong as it pulled against the line. Or sitting at the campfire with some venison chili cooked from a deer that you shot with such a perfect and true shot that only a few people would ever understand what it means. Food keeps us alive, it does, but it's more than that. Eating is more than sustenance. There's also a joy associated with it. Now we're going to read the 23rd Psalm in a little while, but before we do that, I want us to think about one line that maybe gets overshadowed. Thou preparest a table before me. That's about God's provision, and the whole psalm is about God's provision. God is taking care of the psalmist in so many ways. God is present with the psalmist in the darkest valley. And then God sets a table. Our God nourishes us. So in some kind of a way, every meal is communion. In some kind of a way, every meal is the joyful feast of the people of God. It's what the writer Miriam Therese Winter would call Eucharist with a small e. We say grace before we eat to acknowledge that this food we're about to eat, others work to plant and harvest and transport and prepare and serve. We're completely dependent when we eat. We're receiving. We're being nourished. We say thanks to God for the nourishment, and we ask a blessing on all those people that we've never met and that most of them we'll never meet, that have made it possible for us to eat this food and enjoy this meal. Then the psalmist takes us a little bit deeper. And this is where it's really interesting. The psalmist says, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies." God prepares a table for us in the presence of our enemies. So it's not just about God's provision and God's nourishment. This is about God's nourishment in the face of struggle. This is about God's nourishment in the face of challenge and of opposition. There's a conversation starter that goes like this. If you could have dinner with any three people, alive or dead, who would it be? And then people get to share and talk and kind of debate in a friendly, non-threatening way. People give answers like, well, let's see, Jesus and Gandhi and Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali? What? Or maybe some would say, well, Jimmy Page, Jack White, and then The Edge from U2. Inevitably, somebody who's a real rule monger will ask, what if they don't speak the same language I do? Will Beethoven be deaf? Do I have to write it all out? I don't know German. And that's easy enough to deal with. But the funny thing is about this game, no one ever picks anyone that was difficult to be around. I have played that game, and no one has ever said Attila the Hun. No one has ever said, oh, Papa Joe for me. No one ever said, oh, the kids that sat in the back of the bus that used to terrorize all of us on the way to school. What this verse tells us about God is that God does not smite our enemies. There are lots of verses like that in the Psalms, but not here. Here, our enemies are right there at the table with us. We may not want them to be at the table, but they are. In this life, we experience challenges and struggles and opposition, and God is with us in the midst of that. But God does not take away our enemies. Our enemies are right there at the table with us. And God seems to nourish them too, just as God nourishes us. Why? Why would God set a table before us in the presence of our enemies? Is that some kind of a joke? Is there no space somewhere else? I think maybe God is pushing us toward reconciliation. God is pushing us toward reconciling and mending broken relationships. This verse, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies," it isn't just about how God nourishes us despite the challenges of our life. It's also about how God moves us toward the other, the enemy, the stranger, the one that we find so foreign and so hostile. God is moving us toward reconciliation and moving us toward community. Now, honestly, that's not what we want. Not only do I not want to eat with my enemy, I also want my enemy to stay my enemy, and I want my enemy to get what's coming to him. So God is really pushing my buttons here. I want them to remain them. I don't want to have compassion for them. I don't want to think that God is nourishing them just as God is nourishing me, and I don't want to hear about it anymore. But God doesn't care about that. The table is set. I'm starting to think that this table is a table of reconciliation. As the old hymn says, this is the welcoming table, and we're going to eat and drink at the welcoming table. It welcomes me just as it welcomes people that I have difficulty with, people that are challenging, people that I might call my enemy. A lot of people have asked me this week what was the best part of my trip, and that is a very difficult question because there are a lot of best parts. But one that sticks with me, I'll mention to you. On the very first day in Belfast, we did a walking tour of street art, which apparently has been repackaged as street art. You might recognize it as graffiti. But we were walking around the area where our conference was going to be, and Adam was our tour guide, and he took us to see 9 professional graffiti artists, folks, 9 professional graffiti installations that he helped to bring to downtown Belfast. And they're all by significant artists that work on gigantic scale, the side of a building kind of thing. And Adam, the tour guide, was very proud of each of them. One of them stuck with me, and the name of it is Son of Protagoras, which is a weird spelling, so I called the sermon that, in case you can Google that. Don't Google black pudding. Do Google Son of Protagoras. Protagoras was a Greek philosopher. He's pretty much dead now. But he's associated with agnosticism. He was the first to say that he didn't know if there were any gods. It was plural in those days. And Adam, our tour guide, was particularly proud of this work because the artist was very difficult to get along with. He was French. But also, the model for the piece was his son, Adam's son, and he was proud of that too. Now, there's really nothing worse than describing a painting with words, so I'll go as fast as I can. On this wall in this car park was a gigantic figure of a boy kneeling down, holding a dove that had been shot with 2 arrows. And on the fletchings of the arrows are symbols for Catholic and Protestant. So this piece, Son of Protagoras, was doing a lot of stuff all at once. It was suggesting that the struggles between Catholic and Protestant in Northern Ireland had killed peace. It was also mentioning that the 2 denominations, because of the way they acted, had forfeited their witness to the gospel, and faith was gone. And another interesting thing, just because of the proximity of it to the cathedral, it faced the cathedral. So every now and then, people leaving the cathedral could see through buildings to the Son of Protagoras, who was sort of critiquing them. But also in the face of the boy, I could see some tiredness, some longing for reconciliation. Perhaps he might one day put down the dove, and he might too be brought to the welcoming table. When we sit down at the table, friends, we're nourished by God. But at the table, we're brought face to face with those that we struggle with those that challenge us. What I want us to do together is to open our Bibles to Psalm 23, and as we read these words together, let's commit ourselves in some way, large or small, to reconciliation and to community. Psalm 23 is on page 501 of your Pew Bible. This is as much a confession of our faith as anything else. So I'd like us to read this together, and as we read it, I'd like us to hear God inviting us to that table of reconciliation, that table of community. Let us read these words together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. Amen.